32 days before the US election, President Donald Trump's campaign is thrown into disarray after he and First Lady Melania Trump test positive for Covid-19.
Profits and the pandemic. Changi Airport Group reveals the impact of Covid-19 on its business.
And left in the lurch, businesses rush for alternatives after Wirecard stops payment services in Singapore.
Hello, you're watching The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Quay.
And I'm Haryanto Diman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode.
Now, top story today, US President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump are self-isolating after testing positive for Covid-19 32 days before the US election.
Mr. Trump tweeted late Thursday, "Tonight, floaters and I tested positive for Covid-19. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together."
Well, they were tested after one of Mr. Trump's top aides, Hope Hicks, fell ill with the coronavirus. She traveled with the president a number of times during the past week, including on presidential helicopter Marine One and on Air Force One, to the first presidential debate on Tuesday night. So huge news out of the US. Here to share more is the Straits Times' US Bureau Chief Nirmal Ghosh, joining us all the way from Washington, D.C. Nirmal, thank you so much for staying up. Now, we know that Mr. Trump and Melania Trump are Covid-19 positive, but they appear to still be well. So what's the latest that you have for us?
Well, that's it really. They both seem to be well. That's what we are told. And they're going into self-quarantine. We don't know what kind of quarantine that is. We don't know what kind of treatment they're having. Now, of course, President Trump is 74, and that's a particularly vulnerable age, as we know. But he has no underlying conditions that we know of. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't drink, for example. He seems to be in pretty good health. So that's all we know at the moment. We'll have to wait and watch.
A White House doctor also said Mr. and Mrs. Trump would remain at the White House during the isolation. How would that affect his day-to-day duties and, more importantly, Nirmal, his presidential campaign?
Well, the presidential campaign will certainly come to an abrupt halt. Now, if he's feeling okay, if he's feeling up to it, he'd probably tweet. You know, he's an inveterate communicator and salesman, so to speak. So he'll probably carry on tweeting. He might make a video appearance, depending on how he is. But, the second presidential debate, which is due for October 15th in Miami, will almost certainly be gone. In terms of presidential duties, he can continue doing them, but I think there'll be a bit of a pause, a bit of a hiatus, including in foreign policy decisions, because they've mostly been centered on the White House under his administration.
And how damaging is this diagnosis to Mr. Trump's continued message that the coronavirus outbreak is actually waning in the US? And in turn, how would that affect voter sentiment, you think?
Well, if he does okay, if he recovers and comes back, then it'll probably be good for him, because his supporters see him as a sort of gladiator. And he can come out of it and say, I'm being completely vindicated and I'm fine and it's not that big a deal and so forth. But I mean, at this stage, it is all entirely speculative. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? Joe Biden was on a debate stage with him just 48 hours ago. So we don't know about that. We don't know what's going to happen to Melania Trump. So it's a bit speculative. But if he comes out of this fine, then it'll be good for him.
Now, Mr. Trump, the First Lady, and Hope Hicks all testing positive for Covid-19. Does it mean that everyone at the debate, now including Joe Biden, of course, would need to self-isolate?
We haven't heard yet about that, but it seems likely. And I know that a lot of people who were with them all on the plane, even before the debate, the day before that, they have all been tested, including journalists. I know one particular journalist friend of mine who's been tested, and he's negative. And he's been pulled off duty. So yes, I think to various degrees, a lot of people will be probably made to isolate, to quarantine.
Well, thank you so much, Nirmal, for the update and, of course, for setting aside time to speak with us. We were speaking to US Bureau Chief at the Straits Times, Nirmal Ghosh. Now, keep up with these developments at straitstimes.com.
Well, let's look at some more reaction to the news out of Washington that President Trump and his wife tested positive for Covid-19. US Vice President Mike Pence tweeting that he and his wife were praying for the Trumps' full and swift recovery.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also tweeted his well wishes to Mr. and Mrs. Trump for a quick recovery and good health.
And from across the Atlantic, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson sends his best wishes to the Trumps as well. Mr. Johnson, you recall, spent 3 nights in intensive care earlier this year after being taken ill with COVID-19.
Now back home, Changi Airport Group's net profit attributable to shareholders dipped 36% in the financial year ending March 31st due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, CAG said even though the group had performed well in the first 10 months of FY19-2020, business conditions deteriorated sharply in February as the outbreak started to spread globally.
Total revenue for the financial year increased by 3% from $3.04 billion in the previous financial year due to the opening of Jewel.
Well, the impact of the pandemic has hit CAG hard across the board. Passenger traffic at Changi had plunged 33% in February and 71% in March compared to a year ago. As a result, for the first time since 2008-2009, when the global financial crisis hit, Changi Airport saw passenger traffic decline by 5.1% for the year.
News editor at the Straits Times, Karamjit Kaur, is back on the show. Good to see you again, Karam. Karam, these numbers from CAG are for the year ended March 31st, meaning it saw little damage from COVID-19. How much worse can we expect CAG's profits to be next year?
Right, so these numbers that we're looking at, it's really for the 12 months that ended, end of March, which means that it was really in the last 2 months that, they were affected by COVID. The first 10 months before that, actually quite strong for Changi Airport, also because, Jewel, the opening of Jewel had really boosted their commercial revenues. So 10 months were good, 2 months not very good, yet if you look at the profits, net profits fell by almost a third. So not very, very good for Changi Airport actually. And if you move to the current financial year, first 6 months are already gone. Traffic, is almost, it's minimal. The bulk of Singapore Airlines' business, which accounts for about half of Changi's total, is down. So it's not a very good start for Changi. First half of the current financial year. What happens in the next, half, really, so much of it will depend on how quickly borders can be reopened. We're starting to see some of this, some green lanes and some flights being allowed. But whether that will actually translate to real passenger traffic, we need to wait and see what happens there. But I think also important to note that as far as Changi is concerned, they've not always just relied on revenues and profits from the aeronautical side of the business. There's always been a very strong commercial element, so the revenues that they make from dining and shopping, that's probably something that they have a bit more control over. So you do see them starting to have tie-ups with tenants at Jewel, for example. They recently launched not too long ago a scheme that allows you to opt for online food delivery, with the tenants at Jewel. The year-end holidays are coming, and usually, Changi would have something up its sleeves to get people to, spend some of their money at the airport. So we do expect them to launch some of these. And as far as local residents are concerned, you can't fly anywhere year-end holidays. You've got to look for somewhere you can take the kids to. So they might be able to take advantage of year-end holidays to try and drive up some of their commercial revenue. So how that all plays out, it's really a bit hard to say at this stage, but I guess we'll just have to see what happens over the next 6 months.
Right. Let's talk about border reopening that you mentioned. Now, from next Thursday, visitors from Vietnam and Australia, of course, except Victoria State, can enter. Similar to what we already have with New Zealand and Brunei, visitors from these countries will have to undergo COVID-19 test on arrival and remain in their accommodation until they receive a negative result.
That's right. So based on visitor numbers from New Zealand and Brunei, Karam, what kind of inbound figures do you think we'll see from Australia and Vietnam?
So if you look at what's happened with New Zealand and Brunei, we haven't, to be honest, seen people sort of like coming into Singapore in droves. Numbers have actually been quite small. The same goes for all the green lanes that we have announced for business, for essential business and official travel, numbers are very small. I don't think there's going to be a lot of traffic. Even when we allow, people from Australia and Vietnam to come in. And I think predominantly that's because although we do welcome them to Singapore, what's happening is that when they return home, there are restrictions in place. So in Australia and New Zealand as well, when the residents return, they still have to do a 2-week quarantine, a 14 days quarantine, and they're not allowed to do it at home. So they have to serve that quarantine in a government dedicated facility and pay for it. It's something like $3,000. So it's, because of those restrictions, I don't expect to see people really coming in, droves. But I think what's really more significant is that it is a very important first step. It is a unilateral move on the part of Singapore, but it is a very important signal, to these countries that we have decided we can afford to, ease some of our border restrictions with that. We welcome your residents, to Singapore. We have faith in your healthcare systems, in your, COVID management measures. And I do think that when these countries are ready to allow their residents to travel, the hope is that Singapore will be at the top of their mindset. So it will take time. You're not going to see the numbers move very much, but I do think it's a very important first step.
Right. On another aspect, which you mentioned as well, you talked briefly earlier on about SIA's new offerings, a dining experience inside an Airbus A380, first and business meals delivered to your home, as well as a tour of SIA's training facility. Now, do you think these will attract people, and which would be the most popular, you think?
So, there's definitely been a lot of interest in this. Even before the actual announcement was made yesterday, I think some of the numbers were leaked. So 3 things that we're looking at really. One, the meals delivered to your homes, and that's $448, if I remember correctly, for 2 people. But the food is delivered to your home. You have to obviously heat up and all that. Then there's another option if you want a business class meal for 2. That's $288, excluding GST. People we speak to, I don't necessarily think that that's going to be popular, but it's not really a product that's tailored for the masses. So that really is catered to a very small niche group of SIA customers. But I do believe that the meals, the lunch in the Airbus 380, that starts at $50 per head. If you want to sit in the economy cabin, you get to watch their in-flight movies. You just get to hang out in the aircraft for about 3 hours. I think that you probably would see some good amount of interest. And then if you talk about the training facility, they are opening up their facility. You can do sessions in the simulator, aircraft simulator. You can do tours of the facility. There's even like a grooming workshop. If you want to sort of, learn a bit more about how to achieve that SIA girl look. There is a package that allows you to do that. Not so unreasonably priced. Also some programs for children. They get to sort of be like a cabin crew for a day, and then they get to take away some souvenirs, including the SIA kabaya. So so I think you will get quite a bit of interest, for those tours, and also again because as we move, towards the school holidays, parents don't really have anywhere to take their kids. I think these are the programs that will be quite well received.
Right. Well, thank you. As always, Karamjit. We've been speaking to Karamjit Kaur, news editor at the Straits Times.
An update on the COVID-19 situation here. 10 new cases were confirmed today, the lowest daily figure since March 12th, which saw 9 cases. Today's count included 1 community case, a work pass holder. There were also 5 imported cases. Now more details will be released tonight.
In other local news, Workers' Party Chairman Sylvia Lim will not refile her adjournment motion to speak on issues thrown up by the high-profile case involving former Maid Party Liani. Instead, the WP said today that it will join the debate after Law and Home Affairs Minister K. Shanmugam delivers a ministerial statement on the matter in Parliament next month.
Meanwhile, Lim Tian, a lawyer and leader of the People's Voice political party, was arrested in his office today for an alleged offence of criminal breach of trust under the Penal Code. He is also being investigated for an alleged offence of unlawful stalking under the Protection from Harassment Act. In a statement, the police said that the arrest was not politically motivated, as had been alleged by Mr. Lim through his lawyer.
Close to 2,200 employers are under review for suspected abuse of the July Job Support Scheme. 444 of them have been denied payouts amounting to almost $10 million. In a statement today, the Inland Revenue Authority of Singapore said the employers under review will have their JSS payouts withheld until they submit supporting documents to verify the authenticity and accuracy of mandatory CPF contributions made. Their payouts will be adjusted or denied if issues are found. Egregious cases will be referred to the police. IRAS has received over 300 reports from whistleblowers on employers suspected to have abused the system.
The Lim Chu Kang area looks set to be transformed into Singapore's food bowl as the country ramps up its drive to produce more food locally as a buffer against global supply shocks. About 390 hectares of land will be redeveloped under a master plan to create a high-tech, highly productive and resource-efficient agri-food cluster. This will make the Lim Chu Kang area more productive, and with redevelopment, the Lim Chu Kang area could more than triple its current food production.
Well, the name Wirecard might not ring a bell immediately to many of us.
But if you've used your credit card to make a payment in a store, there's a good chance that the transaction was processed by Wirecard.
Well, Wirecard has pulled the plug on its services here after the Monetary Authority of Singapore directed the German firm to stop operations and to return all customers' funds.
From about lunchtime yesterday, credit card transactions were being rejected at merchants who use Wirecard, forcing them to rush for alternative payment methods like Nets and PayNow. Wirecard collapsed into insolvency in June after a massive accounting scandal.
So are there any spillover effects from this scandal to the consumer? Well, journalist Suen Tan joins us now to discuss this. Suen, how does the latest development affect both ends, the customer and businesses or merchants?
So the latest development does not actually affect individuals that much unless they have purchased prepaid cards that are from Wirecard. But the customers might be affected in the sense that they might not be able to pay using their credit or debit card at certain merchants if the merchant only had Wirecard as their payment processor. So for businesses, the impact is much greater because for those that use Wirecard, they have to quickly switch to an alternative payment service provider. And during this transition process, they might not be able to accept credit or debit card from consumers. And we know that credit and debit card are quite popular modes of payment that consumers use at merchants today. And it might also incur additional costs for them if the service provider that they choose next charges them higher fees. So other forms of e-payments such as Nets, SGQR and PayNow continue to be available to merchants in Singapore. And the affected ones can come from a wide range of sectors such as F&B, retail, e-commerce and even insurance businesses.
Now let's take a look at this graphic, Suen. How does Wirecard position itself in the payments process?
Right, so Wirecard actually acts as a payment processor, which is also known in the business as a merchant acquirer. So this means that when someone pays for the goods using his credit card at a merchant, the transaction is transmitted through the acquirer, which is the role that Wirecard plays. It then sends the transaction authorization request to the card scheme under Visa or MasterCard, for instance, and then that sends it on to the card issuer, which is the customer's bank.
Well, Suen, what should affected merchants do? I know you mentioned it earlier, but could you elaborate?
Right, so affected merchants can look to alternative payment service providers, and this can mean banks such as OCBC, DBS and UOB because they also provide these merchant acquisition services. All three banks have already said that they have seen an increased number of inquiries from merchants even in the last few months, like since Wirecard's collapsed. And they also can point merchants to other payment acceptance systems such as unified point of sale terminals, which enable them to accept a wide range of payment schemes through a single terminal. And they can also accept new payment schemes such as Alipay and WeChat Pay.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Suen. Appreciate your time. Well, that was journalist at the Straits Times, Suen Tan.
She's been following these developing stories, so you can check out her stories on this over at straitstimes.com.
A quick look at the global headlines. Indonesia is revising a rule banning foreigners from entering the country as it discusses opening a travel corridor for essential business purposes from Singapore. The country is in talks with our government after agreeing to arrangements with the United Arab Emirates, South Korea and China. An electronic visa service for travel under the corridor arrangement will be available from October 15th, and there will be special booths for Singapore travellers entering through Soekarno-Hatta International Airport and Batam Island.
Malaysians took to social media today to lambast their politicians for violating social distancing protocols and refusing to self-isolate. This after the country recorded its second highest spike in daily COVID-19 cases following the Sabah election last week. The hashtags politicians cause virus and minister cluster were trending on Twitter after ministers and political figures were reported attending public events upon their return from campaigning in the state. At least 2 politicians tested positive on the campaign trail, while cases linked to travel to Sabah have been recorded in all 13 Malaysian states. All schools in Sabah will be closed for 2 weeks following the death of a teacher today due to COVID-19.
Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Kwe. Have a great weekend and we'll see you next week on The Big Story.